Over the last couple of years, I've had more requests to review this than anything else, so why not take a look at one? So what we have here is the GPO Brooklyn Portable Boombox. Yeah, it's a portable boombox, this one. I thought that was the whole point of boomboxes. No, but this isn't one of those static boomboxes that you can't move around. Portable one, this must have a handle on it. Now the look of it, it's 80s inspired retro look. Now often with retro look things, that indicates that it's perhaps more about the looks than it is about the quality. And I've got a feeling that's going to be the case here. I'll explain why in a moment. Now, as far as the features of this, well, we've got the cassette deck on the front, so that's kind of your retro part, but the rest of it is more modern than that. I mean, it's got a slot-loading CD player in the top, and then it moves on to DAB+, DAB and FM radio reception, Bluetooth receiver as well, so you could just use it for the speakers, auxiliary input, USB input for presumably playing back MP3s, so it has pretty much everything on it that you'd want. So if it did work well, this would be a nice thing. So we'll find out. But the thing that worries me a little bit is that when I look through the specs here, it says 2 times 40 watt speakers. Now the thing itself has 4 speakers on the front, so that indicates to me we've got fake tweeters at the top left and right there. As far as the power of this goes, I just want to mention it runs off a lithium cell, so rather than running a load of D cells in this, which it would take quite a bit, it runs off a lithium battery, takes 1.5 hours to charge, and it can play back for 4 hours. Now the brand here, GPO, I've got to mention something about this. GPO in the UK used to be the General Post Office. They were around from 1660 up until 1969. I think they were sort of split off and taken off into different companies. You get the Post Office and a British Telecom, because at a certain point it was all mail and then it moved into telecommunications, telephones and things. And in 1969 they kind of dumped the brand and moved on to other things. So after a while this GPO brand must have become available to purchase, and it was bought by a company called Protelex in Manchester, and they started using the GPO brand to sell retro style telephones. That all makes perfect sense, but then they branched out, so they started putting the GPO brand on those suitcase record players and old style radios and things, so it doesn't make as much sense anymore. One thing about this that's a little bit strange though, it says designed in the UK. What's designed in the UK? I don't think it's the radio. I think it's probably the cardboard box. So it's the box, not the boombox. The reason I say that is you can buy this device in China from Alibaba, and if you order 500 to 1,000 units, it costs you 150 US dollars. And then from there, you've got the ability to have your own branding put on it. So where this says GPO at the top next to the radio tuner, you can have your own logo on there. And also they'll print up a box for you as well. By the way, got to mention, this was an open box deal that I got about a year ago. It's been sitting around since then. I haven't opened it, but it cost me about £100, which is why I went for it. Because I thought if this is £250, it's going to be rubbish, isn't it? It's going to be awful. But, you know, you never know. Look on the bright side, might be all right. It's not going to be all right. Let's find out. I've just spotted a couple of things on the box that I want to mention before I open it up. Notice the balance. It says minimum and maximum. Surely that should be left and right. But talking of which, there's no mention anywhere of this being stereo. Now you'd assume it would be, especially with it having a balance knob, but you can't be too sure nowadays, so fingers crossed. I wanted to talk about this display at the top here. This is the information for the DAB+ radio. Now on some publicity shots it's kind of a dot matrix type display. On this one it's segmented, so I'm interested to see what I actually get inside the box. And another anomaly, these speaker grills, on one picture I've seen, there's really quite large holes on them, whereas this one's your kind of normal fine mesh. So I want to see what's inside the box. Which one did I get? Well, we'll find out. Let's open it up. Okay, so here's the power supply. Output 15 volts, 4 amp. It's multi-voltage input, has a barrel plug on the end and an interchangeable lead on this side. That's my battery, 11.1 volt, 2700 milliamp hour. So presumably I've got to put that in before I start off, and that's the instruction booklet in multiple languages. Well, I've got to say, I can't really complain about the looks. I think they've done quite a decent job there. It's got some weight to it as well. So let's have a look at this tape head and see if it's stereo. Yeah, I'm happy to say it is a stereo tape head. Also above the tape head you'll notice that telltale spring going across. diagonally, that means it's a Panasonic type mechanism, and it does have a permanent erase magnet, so it's not quality, but at least it's stereo. Okay, let's put the battery in the back. There's a big GPO logo on the back here. I wonder if they swap that out depending upon who orders it, or if they just leave it blank. Something I've noticed down here though, on the power consumption, it says 36 watts. Now it did mention it had two 40-watt speakers in it. So what happens when you turn it up to full? Anyway, let's open up the battery compartment. I don't know if you can get these with different size battery packs in, but this adhesive foam's taking up quite a bit of the space, and the idea is presumably between that and the one on the back of the battery door that will sandwich your battery in and stop it rattling around. So let's just plug this in. And this is where your power adapter goes in. There's an LED above there, presumably it shows the charge state as well. Let's see what's on the side. It's a good selection of inputs on here. So we've got RCA stereo, auxiliary in and output. We've got a 3.5mm line in there, two 3.5mm mic inputs at the top, and then USB at the bottom. And then on the top here, that's the slot loading CD player with the eject button next to it. Twin telescopic antenna, and the handle here, which is a little bit wobbly. It could do with having some dampening on that so it doesn't just fall down like that. But anyway, let's switch it on. Right, well, here goes nothing. Oh, we got some power. Well, it seems to be working so far. On the left, this is the source selector, so at the moment we're on the radio. These lights here indicate the mode that you're currently in. There is a lag, I've noticed. If, for example, I turn it all the way down to auxiliary input, just wait, there it goes. So you got auxiliary, Bluetooth, USB, CD, tape, eventually, and radio. Now the radio, there's a mode button over here, a switch I should say. At the moment it's on DAB, digital radio. You can go down, press it to the FM mode. Now the FM one is tuned with this back section of this one on the right here. I'll just turn the volume up a bit. It doesn't seem particularly sensitive. In fact, it's not that brilliant, but I can get some stations up here.
Goal again. Goal in the last.
Try for free at Sage Dog.
Of course, it's not a proper analog radio. It's using a digital tuner mixed with an analog dial. If I move it onto DAB, then you use the front section here, and that changes this station on the left. Now, I've got to say the DAB radio at the moment does not have great reception, but it's working. It's picked up quite a few stations here. You use the front part of this to select your station, and then press the button in when you want to move to that one.
Number 15, and Union
but yeah, there's a lot of breakup on here, which I wouldn't expect on a DAB radio in this room. We can try and do a comparison. I've got a DAB radio in the corner here, so we'll just put it on a station that isn't going to get us any content matches, and we'll see if we can compare the two. So radio 4 should have talking on it with any luck.
But why is it the Belgians have a greater love of mussels than the British? Over to Regula Isouin, an award-winning Belgian food writer who's written books about the food culture of her.
There must be a joke about the mussels from Brussels in that programme. But anyway, I've got a DAB radio from Sony here, tuned to the same station, radio 4. Let's see how that copes with it.
Of Holland, actually. So 65% of the mussels that are harvested in Dutch waters are meant for the Belgian market. We absolutely adore them. I think we probably are.
Now, considering that this is supposed to cost £250, there are some pretty rough edges. Look at this tuning dial. That is a little bit diagonal, but also it's very roughly cut off there. Kind of scratchy, sharp piece of plastic. And in addition to that, there's a little piece of plastic here behind the tuning window, which moves up and down. Now, this is odd. I don't know if you can see. Let me zoom you in a bit. Yeah, what you're looking at here is the tape counter, or at least that's how it's described. However, you'll see from the bottom of your screen there's no cassette in the machine. So I'm not playing anything at all at the moment. What's happening is as soon as you move into the tape mode, this starts off at 0 and then just starts counting up. You can always reset it if you want, but it just carries on again. So really this is a stopwatch that just counts up in seconds as far as I can make out. Not the most useful of things. It's quite a dim display this, so I hope you can still see it's counting up. So let's just pop a cassette in. Type 1, it's the only kind that this machine can handle, and also no noise reduction, of course. So what happens when we press fast forward? Does this move any quicker? Let's find out. No, it's still counting up in what looks like seconds. Let's try rewinding, see if it starts counting down. No, still counting up. So really that is a stopwatch that's counting up in seconds. Whether or not that's any use to you, I don't know, but it's certainly not a tape counter. At least the auto stop's working. Okay, well let's try playing the cassette. It comes from the YouTube audio library. It's all Patrikios. Now to me it did sound like the tape was running slow in this machine. Whether or not that's true we'll find out later on with the wow and flutter meter tests. One thing I do know though is that the tape didn't sound very good in this. It sounded muffled and woolly. Now I've recorded this tape on a good quality device. In fact it was on the Sony WM-D6C Professional Walkman. So it sounded good to start with. It's just not being reproduced very well. Now I could put that down to perhaps misaligned heads, and if there was an azimuth screw hole on the front of here it might be worth trying to adjust that, but there isn't. One thing I'll mention about the treble and bass and volume and balance controls while we're down here though is that they are plasticky and wobbly and nasty feeling. I noticed they had a maximum and a minimum on them, but they just spun freely. There was no top and bottom position, but as you can see at the top of the screen here it's reflected on the display there, so you know when you're in the center position on each just by looking at the display, but there's no detent on the controls themselves. You have to keep your eye on that. So similarly with the balance, you want to just get it set in the middle like that. So there we go, that was the cassette deck. We'll do some more checks on that later on. Let's try some of the other features. The output level display on the front here is just for entertainment purposes, and I've got no issue with that whatsoever, as you'll know from previous videos. I like flashing lights. However, if you don't have to have it switched on, but I'll turn it on now. We'll press play on the tape and you'll see it's already reaching quite high, although you won't be able to hear the music yet. It's at a very low volume, so it's not an accurate reflection of the true output level. Once you've gone up to any kind of normal volume for listening, it starts peaking out in the red. Let's try a CD. If you've ever used a CD player, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this display is showing the minutes and seconds, so we'd be just under 2 minutes into the track. But no, we're actually at the 2.5 minute point, because this display is registering seconds and there's no way to change it. It just counts up second by second. So if you want to figure out where you are in a track, you'll have to do a little bit of mental arithmetic. It's a very strange choice and something I've never seen before. Now I was hoping to have something more positive to say, and the CD player definitely allows me to do that, because it does sound better than the cassette. The cassette was quite muffled, kind of woolly sounding as I mentioned, but also it didn't seem to have much in the way of stereo separation, whereas the CD player definitely sounds like a proper stereo signal. But it does have a slightly crashy edge to it, you know, kind of metallic, a bit harsh. It could get wearing if you were listening to it for a long period of time, but it didn't skip. It was nice and clear. There was no weird distortion in there, no background hum or buzz, any of that business. So yeah, as a CD player, it's working fine. It doesn't have any CD text on it, but that's to be expected for a device like this. All the controls operated as they should do. So yeah, as a CD player, it performs the function that it's designed for. And while we've got the CD in the machine, we might as well try copying one of the tracks. It really is struggling with rewinding this cassette. I'm going to swap it over and try a different one instead. Right, so I'm going to need a Type 1 tape. I don't have many of those in the house, but this will have to do. It's a Bush SF90. They're quite nice looking tapes. I don't think there's anything particularly special about the quality of them though, but they'll suit this particular device. Also, there's a recording on that tape already of a radio play. I'll just play you a section.
Would have bought for herself. Helen thought about Helen Maguire, whose youngest son, Oliver, she was...
Very interesting. But the reason I'm using that tape is because I can record over it and we'll see how well that permanent erase magnet gets rid of that recording. Now you'll see I've got some tin foil under it here, and that's in an attempt to cut out the electrical interference that it's picking up from my Wi-Fi router. I've tried it before in a video, you might have seen that, and it worked well. On this device it's not really helping too much, it's still picking up quite an annoying click. So it seems like the shielding in this isn't really doing the job. So what I'm going to have to do, move this into a different location to do the record test so I can get a fair and accurate result. Okay, so to test this out, I've got a USB stick here with an MP3, a WAV file and a FLAC on it. Yeah, so as expected, it's only able to play back the MP3 file. There's no text that accompanies the MP3 files, it's strictly track numbers. The info button doesn't do anything either. You can see there it said F01 at the beginning, so that's folder 01. So be able to put your music in folders if you really wanted to. It's just a rudimentary playback of MP3s really. However, we should be able to record onto this USB stick. So let's turn on the radio and see if we can do that.
What about the argument that we might be short-sighted to ignore the potential of gene editing now and investing in these sorts of technologies, because we might look back in the future?
Okay, let's see if that works.
That we might be short-sighted to ignore the potential of gene editing now and...
Yes, that's fine. I'll just try the Bluetooth now. Yeah, so there it is. And that just leaves one function at the bottom here that we haven't tried, which is auxiliary input. I've plugged a wire in the side and yes, it works. I'd have been surprised if that hadn't worked, but at least we know it does. However, I've got to say, if you do want to send your audio to some speakers over either Bluetooth or via a wire, there are far better options out there than this, much cheaper and with better quality. Right, let's do those wow and flutter tests now. We've got both scales set to 1% at the top, so we're looking at the top row on each. We'll start on the right hand side here. So this is really the wow and flutter measurement, the wobbliness of the audio, whether or not the speed is stable, and it's moving around a little bit. It's down here at 0.2. I'll put 0.3 at the top of the scale so we can zoom in a bit. So now we're looking at around about 0.25%-ish wow and flutter. To put that into context, a lot of the older devices would do 0.0 something or even 0.00 something. So, you know, it's not great, but that's how things are nowadays. That's typical for this kind of mechanism. If we move over to the left on the speed, I was wrong before when I said it was running slow. Well, I think what was happening was it had trouble playing that particular tape. For some reason, it seemed to have issues moving it around. So on this tape, which is a better quality one, we're looking at, well, if 1% is at the top, around about 0.6% fast, I think there. So there you go. Those are the scores. Let's try something else. Right, let me explain what's going on here. We've got the spectrum analyzer on the top, And at the moment that's plugged into this Sony PCM recorder. I'm just using this as a playback device at the moment. It's playing a WAV file, which is a sweep, which goes from 20 Hz up to 20 kHz. So a low note up to a high note, and then it starts again at the beginning. And as it plays each of those frequencies, you can see it represented on the spectrum analyzer. And if I unplug it, you'll be able to hear what the spectrum analyzer is listening to. So that's what's showing up on the display. Now my intention with this was to plug this device into the auxiliary input on the boombox and then record that onto the cassette. And then I was going to play back the cassette to see how much of the audio it's captured and how much of it it's missed off. We've run into a bit of a problem though. Just by plugging it in and then listening to it over the headphone without even getting the tape recorder involved, it's messed up the audio completely. Just have a look at this. Right, so this is the auxiliary input for the boombox. You can see it registering on the display there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to plug the earphones into there. I'm going to plug the output from this into the boombox. So what's happening now, we've got a loop going through. This is playing the audio into the boombox, and then the headphone output from the boombox is going into the spectrum analyzer. And just look at the display up there. It's all over the show. Remember how before we had the individual bars? This is, I think, known as harmonic distortion when frequencies aren't represented properly, but I'd just say it was really messing up the audio. So my intention of getting a nice clean audio recording onto the cassette and then playing that back, it's out of the window now because the thing can't even hear properly, never mind playback. So what I'm going to do instead, I've got a cassette with a sine sweep on that I recorded on a different device. I'm going to play that back and we'll just see how that shows up on this display. Okay, so that's showing a little bit more normal now. You can see the individual bars. Just wait and see when it drops off. It won't get very much further than this, I don't think. No, it's gone now. So that was at 6.3K at the top. And we'll see where it starts at the bottom. Round about sort of 40 is the first one that's got a proper amount showing on it. But yeah, it does show you that even if you were just plugging something into this and listening to it over the speakers, in that loop somewhere, it's creating a heck of a load of distortion on the audio. Okay, I think it's time to take a look inside. Well, I'll have to admit that I'm quite surprised. It looks like there has been an attempt to make something of a reasonable quality. They didn't quite achieve their aim, but you can see someone's tried. So let's have a look around the various components here. So there's not too much going on in the back. We've got the battery compartments here with the wires leading off from there, and that's the power socket to its right. Back here, that's the CD drive. I'll do a couple of close-ups of the chips and things just in case anyone is interested in figuring out exactly what model this is, but no doubt it's something that you put inside a computer as well. Now moving on to this main section, the rear of the front of the unit, and I'll admit I was wrong. The tweeters are real and they are connected. They're connected up to the main speakers, so the wires run up to these and then two wires go off the terminals up to the tweeters. Strangely enough, both the large speaker and the small ones have the same number printed on them, SW918. I was hoping to see some specs on the back, but it doesn't have that. They're both made by Sunwin. Now, I mentioned there was quite a lot of weight to this device, and I now realise where it's all residing. It's on the back of the speakers. Just look at the size of the magnet on those. I mean, surely these are capable of going a lot louder than this device will allow them to go, but yeah, that's where all the weight is. It's in the speakers. So there's the back of the tape mechanism. This circuit board that's on the top is obscuring our view of it a bit, but I'm sure you can make out that it's a very similar unit to the one that we're seeing in a lot of these modern day cassette decks. The flywheel's down here. It's plastic laid on top of metal, and at the top here's the motor. There's no branding on there, unfortunately. I don't know if you can read that, but this section here, that's the DAB radio module. So it's just a component that's plugged in here. No doubt you can swap that out depending upon what's required in different countries. I'm not sure why it doesn't get a great reception. Now, while I've got this open, I think I might try and take some screws out of the back of this section, which is the radio tuner window. Hopefully I can get that piece of plastic out of there that's rattling around. And then I'll put it all back together again, because you can see that somebody has made quite a reasonable effort to try and construct a a fairly decent quality boombox using the off-the-shelf components that they can get hold of nowadays. It just seems like perhaps the components aren't completely up to the task. Right, well, it's time to sum this one up, and I'd say the average customer for this is probably more interested in the aesthetics than its performance, but I'm going to talk about the performance for a moment. And I'd say in general most of the features vary between being either mediocre down to poor. I wouldn't say anything was particularly good about it. Perhaps the best performing part was the CD player, which was adequate, although it was a little bit unusual just having the second showing on the display. I quite like the fact it was a slot loader though. I thought that was unusual. But the rest of it, well, the radio, whether you're listening to the digital radio, DAB, DAB+, or going on to FM, the quality of the reception was poor. I've got other devices that get in a much stronger signal in this location without any kind of breakup, and this has got the two aerials on the top, so there must be something weird about the configuration inside. I have looked up other reviews online and other people have that same issue, so it's not just this particular machine. Now, as far as the cassette deck goes, well, the performance of that is definitely in the poor area. Kind of muffled, indistinct, very poor stereo separation. Could probably benefit from having the heads aligned if you could do it, but I'm not sure that would actually improve things too much. It might be something beyond the actual mechanism that's causing the problems. As far as the wow and flutter and the speed goes, no real problem there. It's kind of typical boombox type of performance. The overall sound quality though, quite crashy, metallic, bit echoey, not particularly pleasant to listen to. And you've got to remember, this whole thing markets for, it's about £250. Well, that's what it's supposed to be. I've seen it online in sales at £200, but still that's a considerable amount of money for something that performs like this. So you really are just buying it for the looks. And as far as the looks go, you got the flashy lights on here, the digital display on the tape deck. That is a weird thing, just having a counter that goes up and has no relationship whatsoever to how the cassette performs. And of course, looking inside, there's no belt going up to a counter mechanism, so that is how it's supposed to work, but it's pretty useless. So yeah, all show and very little go. But I don't want to finish this video on a negative like that, so we'll just put that out there. Look, if you want something that looks flashy and costs you £200, well, there it is. But let me give you some alternatives. Now, if you just want to stream music from your phone over Bluetooth or pick up DAB radio and play some CDs, well, there are other alternatives to what I'm going to show you. I'm interested in devices that have a cassette deck in them. Now, there's always that chap in the comments that says, who wants to play cassettes anymore? And my answer to that is always, people who want to play cassettes do. So if you're a person who wants to play cassettes, here's a couple of alternatives to the GPO Brooklyn. First off, if you want all the features that the GPO Brooklyn has, this is the Philips AZB798, and it costs £120. And I've reviewed this before, and this has the exact same feature range. Okay, there's no flashy lights on here or tape counter that isn't a tape counter. So this has a CD player, a cassette deck on the front. It receives DAB radio in addition to FM, and you can also stream your music to it over Bluetooth or plug in an auxiliary sound source. In addition to that, it also has a remote control, which the GPO Brooklyn doesn't have. So this is a much cheaper way to get a pretty similar performance to the GPO Brooklyn. I've got to say though, the reception on the radio on this one is a lot better, but as far as the performance of the tape deck goes, still kind of muffled, poor wow and flutter. You know, they haven't concentrated on that part of it at all. But there you go, that is an option that would save you round about £100 on the GPO Brooklyn and give you the exact same feature set, but without the flashy looks. So let me show you another one. Now this is the last one, and this would be my choice. Well, almost. It's the Panasonic RX-D50, and just like the Philips model from before, I've reviewed this previously on the channel, and there'll be links in the video description and no doubt popping up somewhere at the top of the screen. But the RX-D50 is one of a pair of machines that are very similar. The only difference between them really is that the RX-D55 is the louder of the two, and the RX-D50 doesn't have as much power output. But the truth is, if you turn this one all the way up to the top, it doesn't sound that great anyway. and the battery life on the RX-D50 is considerably better than it is on this model. So I would go for the RX-D50, and I had a look online today to see what the price was, and they're currently going for £92. Now these particular models, they've been making them for years at Panasonic. So what we're dealing with here is an older device, so there's no DAB radio on here, there's no Bluetooth. All we've got is a cassette deck, an FM/AM radio, and a CD player at the front. Oh, and it will play MP3s off a USB stick as well. But because they've been making it for years without changing it, the performance, the quality of this, the components in here are far better than what they're putting in modern day devices. So overall, the sound quality on this is, I would say, better than any other boombox that I've tested in recent years. And that's because it isn't a new one, it's an old one that they're still making. So if you want something to play back your cassettes, then this would be my recommendation. But you're missing out on all that Bluetooth and DAB stuff. But you know, you can get that elsewhere. As far as a decent cassette deck goes, this is it. But I say decent, I mean, it's not like top end, it's a basic thing. But the same goes for back in the day. If you got a boombox, generally they weren't the greatest of performers as far as cassette decks goes. Wrong way around. This one that I picked up not too long ago, I mean, it's got a couple of nice features on here, but it doesn't have any kind of Dolby noise reduction on it. And in fact, the problem with buying something old like this is that you're more likely to get something that doesn't quite perform as it once did. This one doesn't sound right. There's a lot of hiss on it, and I'm sure it's missing out the treble. Perhaps the tweeter on the right hand side's not working, so I'll need to have a good look in that. It probably needs all its caps replacing, no doubt. Now, over my shoulder, there's a triple deck, and you might see the video where I took that one apart and I had to repair all three mechanisms. The belts had gone in each of them, but also the clutches had popped off two of them as well, and I had to get some spare decks to replace them. So there's a lot of problems inherent in buying an old boombox. Everyone says, oh, get an old one, they're the better ones. Yeah, they were when they were new, but now they're getting on in years, and it's more than likely you're going to come up with some kind of issues with them. I don't think I've got a single boombox that's an old one that doesn't have some kind of problem with it. But you buy a new thing like the RX-D55 or the RX-D50, it's going to work out of the box. And if it doesn't, you can send it back. So that would be my recommendation. If you just want to play cassettes, listen to the FM/AM radio and play CDs with a really rich, nice quality sound to it. So the RX-D50, the RX-D55 from Panasonic, that's my recommendation. As far as the GPO Brooklyn goes, well, if you want something that looks flashy, then maybe it'd be all right. But if you plan on using it as some kind of prop for retro kind of productions, you have to pop in the background of something that you're pretending is 1980, it stands out immediately. Everyone knows what it is and where it came from. So even for one of those, you're better off getting an old one, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't work if you're just going to stick it on a shelf somewhere. Anyway, I think I've spoken long enough, so it just shows you there are some options out there. It's not all doom and gloom. You can play back your cassettes if you really want to, and they'll sound pretty decent on something like this. But that is it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.